This week I learned about a man named Brian Stevenson. He is a lawyer, a social activist. He is also the founder of a not-for-profit called Equal Justice Initiative. And this non-for-profit gives free legal advice, free legal representation to folks who are appealing their convictions or their sentences. And it's also an organization that takes on any death penalty case in Alabama for free. But when you know something else about Brian Stevenson, his work takes on new meaning. When he was 16 years old, his grandfather's house was robbed by some young men, and they were trying to steal his grandfather's television. And in the process of that robbery, his grandfather was murdered. An interesting thing about Brian Stevenson's family is that instead of focusing on revenge and retribution, they asked questions like, how do we live in a community where things like this happen, where young men are robbing the houses of 86-year-old, frail, elderly men? Now, Mr. Stevenson's response to both his work and his grandfather's murder is this: I've always had this idea that we're all more than the worst thing we've ever done. That if someone tells a lie, they're not just a liar. If somebody steals something, they're not just a thief. Even if you're a murderer, you're not just a murderer. Justice requires that we understand the other things you are. I've always had this idea that we're more than the worst thing we've ever done. Now, you've probably heard this next story a number of times. I know that in the last year and a half or 2 years, I know I've preached on it at least once. So why would we go back to it? Well, there's difficulty in hearing and retelling the same story over and over again, right? We think we know everything about it already. We think that we already know the ending, and so we just kind of skip over some of the details, or we don't really listen. But do we really know everything there is to know about this story? From Luke 15 this morning. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. Jesus said there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them, and a few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country. And there he squandered his property in dissolute living. I love that translation, dissolute living, right? There's so much that's in there. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would have gladly filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and he went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and he put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, put it on him, put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet, get the fatted calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now that first audience that heard that story, they would have been completely stunned. They would have been stunned to, first of all, hear this son tell his dad, essentially, Dad, I've been thinking, I really wish you were dead. I really wish you were dead so I could have all the money that you've got. I've been thinking more. Why don't you just give it to me now so that I can take off and go do my own thing and get on with my life? They would have been stunned to hear that. They would have been thrilled to hear about how that same son got his comeuppance. I mean, come on, you guys, let's be honest. Doesn't it feel just a little bit good to read that part? Like, oh, he's getting what he deserves. We kind of like hearing that, right? People do bad things. We want to hear that they get what they deserved. It's okay to admit that. I think it feels kind of good. Surely I can't be the only one in this room. Now this son, he hits rock bottom, absolutely rock bottom. He gets what he deserves. He literally sits in the mess he has made of his life and wallows with the pigs in shame. But then this plot twist, out of nowhere, the dad practically breaks his own ankles running down the road to embrace his wayward son, because we're all more than the worst thing we've ever done. To Jesus' audience, this would have been shocking, this plot twist. They would have walked away from it, retelling it to each other over and over again. Did you hear what Jesus said? Did he say what I think he said? Can you believe that Jesus said that? I can't believe that. Can you believe that? It would have really sat with them, because what this son did was so absolutely terrible. He should have been carrying the shame of it with him his entire life. Like if this village could have lined up on the side of the road with the son coming at one end and the father going down the other, they would have been lining up, picking whatever nasty stuff up they could off the ground, chucking it at him, and ringing a bell saying, shame, shame, shame. Good for you if you got that Game of Thrones reference, by the way. Bonus points, friends. Now it's possible that that's what the son expected. We hear him tell his father, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Perhaps it is what he prepared himself to endure as he walked that long walk home. Maybe he already felt that shame so deep down within him that he already believed that he deserved whatever punishment his father and their community could give out to him. But we are all more than the worst thing we have ever done. And we are all more than the worst thing we've ever been told about who we are. Y'all ever feel shame? I don't need a show of hands here, but I know you have. I know everybody listening has felt shame. I don't mean a guilty feeling for doing a known wrong. Guilt and shame, they are different things. Guilt says, hey, you know what, I did this thing and I know it was wrong and I feel kind of bad about it. Like maybe I shouldn't have been doing that thing. And then we choose to atone for it or not. Guilt is self-reflection on knowing that we've made a mistake. And mistakes are something that we have all made and that we all will make again. Guilt makes us uncomfortable. And let's be honest here, sometimes it's okay to be uncomfortable with some of the things that we have done. That uncomfortableness can help motivate us to try and make things right, to learn from our mistakes, to make different decisions in the future. A little guilt isn't necessarily a bad thing, isn't necessarily destructive. But shame says there is something fundamentally wrong with me. I am flawed to my core just by existing. Shame makes us hate who we are. It's insidious. It tells us we are not worthy of being loved because of something we've done or something that has been done to us. It doesn't even have to be our own failure or our own bad deed. Shame can seep into us even by experiencing something awful. Shame is like a poison that counters every loving thing that God tells us about ourselves. Now, I don't know why you've felt shame before. I certainly know why I have. How at times it has seeped into me and replayed the worst decisions I have ever made and the worst experiences of my life, some of which I had zero control over, and yet feel all the shame for experiencing. But what are we? We are all more than the worst thing we have ever done. We are all more than the worst thing we've ever been told about ourselves. And we, even when we're the ones doing the telling, and we are all more than the worst thing that has ever been done to us. We're just all more. On her podcast, Kate Bowler tells her audience, there are some secrets we'd rather not tell, but that eat us alive. The affair, the lump we've been trying to ignore, but we know it's probably not nothing. The addiction that has slowly crept its way back into our lives. The sinking loneliness we feel. The reason the estrangement keeps us from picking up the phone, and then our problems compound. One pain begets another. Our unsolved problem becomes the breeding ground for a different kind of separation. Shame. Shame keeps us separate. Shame keeps us without words. Shame keeps us trapped in the lie that no one will ever understand, and it will never get better. Shame whispers you should do more and you're nothing until you finally truly get over this. Shame is quite certain that we are stuck forever. In this earlier imaginary description of the village lining the road where the son was walking home, where they all come out to meet him and shame him for his worst mistake, do you know who would have never had a hand up, who would have never bent down to pick excrement off the ground to throw, who would have never chanted shame with the crowd? The God who created us all, the God who created you and sits with you however you feel about yourself. Friends, whatever it is that does or has brought you shame, it does not define you. It does not speak for you. And it certainly doesn't make you who you are. It is not the culmination of who or what you are. And it is not the end of your story, because we are all more than the worst thing we have ever done. We are all more than the worst thing we've ever been told to us about ourselves. And we are all more than the worst thing that has ever happened to us. Amen.